Hey guys, Will here. Welcome to the very first review video that we're putting together in our brand new studio. So very exciting day for us, as well as an exciting review. This is a really exciting wheel from Cube Controls. They've obviously just straight away looking at this wheel, done a lot of improvements, and they've really taken on board a lot of things that people have given them feedback-wise from previous generation wheels. So F Pro today, we're gonna be going through all the details. There's quite a lot to unpack today in terms of software as well. So we're gonna be taking you through everything you need to know to decide whether this is the wheel for you. So let's get to it. So as you can see, this wheel is absolutely loaded with features. I'd say it's probably the most feature-packed wheel that I've ever seen that doesn't have a screen on it. So there's a lot to go through today. We'll take you through every single one of those features. But the main call-out features for the F Pro, the two main things that they're sort of drawing attention to in their marketing, is their new dual mode, which allows you to connect this directly to your PC via Bluetooth. So not using the Bluetooth protocol that's built into the SimuCube ecosystem like their other wireless wheels. And we'll elaborate on that a little bit more further on in the video too, but it does require your PC, of course, to have a Bluetooth connection. So your motherboard needs to support it, or you'll need to have some sort of little dongle that you can plug in via USB to give you that Bluetooth connectivity. You also have the option to connect via USB as well. So regardless of whether you're connecting via Bluetooth or USB, all of the functions of the wheel will work with your system. So that also includes the two analog paddles on the back as well. Now, the reason I call that out specifically is that one of the limitations of the SimuCube wireless system as it stands at the moment, at least, is that you are limited to 28 digital inputs. And what I mean by that is 28 different on-off switches or 28 different positions. So you can have a rotary encoder that will, send a pulse up or a pulse down, or you can have a push button or a switch or something like that, but you can't have any analog inputs on the standard wireless system with the SimuCube. So a little bit of a different take with this wheel on wireless connectivity. We have seen a similar kind of system implemented on the SF1000 Thrustmaster Ferrari wheel that we reviewed probably almost a year ago now. That's connected via Wi-Fi. So you could establish a connection through Bluetooth, and then it would connect to your network through the Wi-Fi network, whereas this is a full-time Bluetooth connection. So a little bit different, and it will be interesting later on to see if there is any noticeable latency or lag when using this wheel connected via Bluetooth compared to via USB. Now, one of the call-out changes with the F Pro is the upgrade to the new QCon magnetic connector here, which I assume QCon stands for Quick Connect. So that literally just mates magnetically to the back of the wheel. And it does attach with a decent amount of magnetic force there. So you really do have to intentionally try to unplug that. It's not something that's just gonna come unplugged just driving around. And I did actually test by sort of pinching the cable between my knees and then turning the wheel and seeing whether the spring force on the cable here was strong enough to actually pull the connection off. And it wasn't until you really sort of yanked on it that it came loose. So I don't see any issues with that, with people sort of having the wheel disconnect accidentally while they're driving. Now, this is responsible for the USB connection if you are driving via USB, but it's also responsible for charging the wheel should you be connected via Bluetooth. So if you're running in Bluetooth mode, the battery will establish the connection and keep everything running. So you don't need the cable when you're driving, but if you are connected via USB, obviously you will be relying on the cable. So definitely a lot more convenient there than having to screw in and unscrew a connector. But the main reason why I'm enthusiastic about that is because I wasn't a big fan of the connector that Cube Controls used on their previous wheels, and I have been quite critical of this in the previous reviews that I've done, particularly with the GTX, because that is such an expensive wheel. I expected that they would have used a high quality connection for it. Now, these connectors you can actually buy, I had a look myself, you can buy them off Alibaba for like $1 or $2 each. So they are very cheap connections. And one of the issues that I had with it, or the issue that I had with it, I should say, is over time, the plastic threads here do become quite loose to the point where they don't really engage properly anymore. So that is still engaging, but if I tighten it too far, it just jumps the plastic thread. And if you do continuously over tighten these, it will get to the point where it just becomes loose and it can fall off very easily. So that was definitely probably the weakest link, I would say, in the previous Cube Controls wheel. So really happy to see the tail end of that. But having said that, there are a couple of things that do concern me just looking at this design. So if we zoom in nice and close here on the connector, you can see the pins are recessed. So if I hold it on its side like that, you can see the pins aren't actually poking up beyond the magnetic surface here. So the likelihood of, just dropping this on the ground or on a metal object or something like that on your rig and shorting the pins out is quite slim. However, because it is magnetic, what happens if I grab a screw is bits of metal and junk can kind of get attracted to this connector. Now, thankfully, what tends to happen is it kind of pushes to the outside. So you can see if I drop it in the center, it kind of jumps to the side. But it is possible to wedge something metal inside like that. Now, the reason why that is a concern is obviously if you short these pins out, this is typically connected directly to the motherboard on your PC, or at least via a USB hub. And if you short a positive power line to a data pin on the connection, that is very likely to cause permanent damage to your motherboard, which could be very expensive to replace. So what I would have liked to have seen with this connection, and I'm not saying it's a poor quality connection by any means, it does the job well, but you can see on the wheel side here, we have little flat contact pads. On the connector side, we have the little pogo pins which make contact with those pads, and they squish in and out. If we poke it with a screw, you can actually see here, you might not be able to see very clearly, but those actually do squish in and out, so they're spring loaded there. So good quality pins. There's absolutely no issues with the quality here, but I would like to see the design reversed so you had little pads inside the connector and have those slightly recessed inside the connection, so it's pretty much impossible to ever short those pins out, and then have the pogo pins on the wheel side where, you know, obviously there's never going to be power here coming out unless you connect something to it, so you don't really have to worry about shorting the pins out. I haven't tested with a multimeter, but I would assume that there'd be a diode on the PCB in here that stops power from coming out from the battery and only allows the battery to charge. There'll be something like that in place, I'm sure, because, you know, charging circuits are quite complex these days. So yeah, not a bad design by any means, but that is one thing that if I was designing this, I would have designed it the other way around. So we had recessed contact pads on the connector side where there is a risk of something potentially getting jammed in there and shorting out the pins, and have the floating or pogo pins on the wheel side. Now, just while we are on the subject of connectivity here, you'll also notice in the back of the housing here, there's a little connector there. Now, there is a quick release system which is available through Cube Controls. Unfortunately, we don't have one here that we can show you, but that also includes pass-through for data and power. So what that means is that if you're using other Cube Controls wheels, you can actually change between them, have the base side of the quick release attached to USB all the time, and then just swap out your wheels on the fly that way as well. So they've really kind of thought about a lot of these little details to make things a little bit easier. Now, while we have the Formula Pro wireless and GTX wheels here on the desk conveniently, there's a couple of other little things that I wanted to point out too. Now, one of the other nitpicks that I had with the GTX wheel was the lack of a power button. What that meant is that you had to unplug it from USB every single time you stopped using it, or every time you turned off your rig, unless of course you're switching it off at the wall. Not a major big problem or anything like that, but just one of the things that did annoy me, because I'm running a powered USB hub on my rig. So that meant that the wheel would always be lit up, the screen would always be active unless I went around the back of the rig and unplugged it. So with the new F Pro wheel, we do have a little power switch on the back here, and that allows us to switch it off and on. And you can see there, we also have LED illumination, which we're going to be taking a look at in just a moment too. And there are some really cool features around that too. If you can't tell, I actually really love this wheel already, and I haven't even driven with it yet, but very, very cool wheel. Now, if we put the F Pro next to the Formula Pro wireless here and have a little bit of a look at them side by side, you can see ergonomically they are quite similar. One of the things that I noticed straight away as soon as I picked this up is a couple of changes to the grip material here. So we have 44mm wide at the thickest point, and it is of course a 280mm wheel, or 282mm to be exact. So a good diameter for a wide variety of different styles of cars, despite the fact that it is a Formula style wheel, of course. So you're not going to be doing rally or drifting or anything like that, but 280mm is a good diameter, at least in my experience, for driving a variety of sort of GT3 style cars, GT4s even, and of course, you know, Formula One, all those kinds of cars. The smaller you go on the wheel, the more twitchy and notchy things tend to feel. The wider you go, the more dampened your inputs will become. But 280mm, good decision there, I think. Now, what I noticed here straight away is the difference in the material between the two grips. One of the things that I understood why they did it, but wasn't necessarily a big fan of when we reviewed this particular wheel, was the material that they've used here. So this is kind of like a tacky material. It kind of almost, it grips your hands as you move it. And it's the same material that they used on the IRACING wheels more recently as well. You'll remember originally they had Alcantara or leather, and then they moved across to this material. Now, this is the same kind of material that's used in many real life race cars. Now, although this material has proven to be quite durable in our experience, I've put probably not so many hours into this wheel, but a lot of hours into, I'll probably say maybe 30 or 40 hours at least into this wheel, and there's been no real signs of wear and tear on it whatsoever. One thing you will notice if you have a close-up look at it is it does tend to pick up debris and dust and all sorts of things. You can see around the tops here. It's picking up a lot of dead skin and you know, dust and stuff off my gloves. But other than the fact that it's really difficult to keep clean, it just kind of has this tacky, sticky, gross, dirty kind of feeling to it. And you know, some people might not feel that way about it, but you know, it is what it is. And that's, I think, an important thing, an important point of difference to point out here for you guys. So we'll set that guy aside too. The material that they've used here, although it looks very similar and it has a similar amount of squish to it, it doesn't have that same kind of tacky feel to it. So that's actually quite a smooth surface here. Now, I don't know whether that's going to wear in over time. We'll see what happens throughout the course of review. And I do intend to continue to use this on my rig for a lot of racing videos moving forward as well. So we'll see, and obviously let you guys know how it stands the test of time. But yeah, at face value at least, it's got a much sort of smoother, less sticky feeling to it. It just doesn't feel gross in your hands like this other material can do if it does bother you. So just an important thing to point out there. Now, if we flip the wheels around backwards as well, another thing that you'll notice is that they've actually integrated these little plastic pads here on either side, and that is to further mitigate wear and tear on the grips. So if you have a look at these ones, you can see they haven't worn out. They've actually stood the test of time quite well. And same deal with the IRACING wheel here as well. We haven't had any problems with wear and tear, but I know there are people that are a lot harsher on their wheels and equipment in general than I am. And we have seen wear and tear on some of the Fanatec wheels that we've tested in the past here. I remember my original Formula V2 wheel had quite a bit of wear around these areas, because as you're moving your hands around, those tend to be the areas that get the most friction and rubbing away. So the move here to little plastic pads is obviously designed to mitigate that. And you know, again, everywhere we look on this wheel so far, at least, those little attention to detail things that, you know, obviously are based on feedback that they've had from previous generation products, it's all really great to see. Now, another thing that I noticed immediately with the F Pro, which I'm sure a lot of people will be happy about, is there's far more clearly defined detents or clicks on the rotary encoders throughout the wheel. So the 4 thumb encoders as well as the ones on the face here. So we do still have a little tiny bit of dead zone there with in terms of movement before we get a click. But when you actually go to engage a click there, very, very clearly defined and feels nice and uniform across all 4 of these encoders on the face, and the thumb encoders feel very clearly defined too. Now, I put the Formula V 2.5 wheel from Fanatec up here on the table too, because this is a wheel that we've had a lot of complaints about, specifically when it comes to the thumb encoders. Now, I actually noticed this when I did the review of the Formula V2 many years ago now, and kind of found that I got used to it over time. So what I ended up doing was kind of adopting a 1 flick equals 1 move mentality rather than a 1 click equals 1 move mentality. And that worked quite well for me. But you know, the fact that I've had so many people whinge about how loose these are compared to other wheels obviously means that it has been a problem for quite a few people. So something that's definitely worth comparing to here, I think. Now, if we have a look at the former generation Cube Controls wheels as well, those definitely have stiffer detents or stiffer clicks than the Fanatec wheels do. But again, you can accidentally bump that with a glove on in particular, and you know, they do feel nice, but they definitely don't have that same quality and that same sort of intentional click to them that we have on the F Pro, and that goes for the GTX as well. So it's obvious here that they've made an intentional decision to move across to much stiffer rotary encoders on the F Pro, which I think for the majority of people, although for me, I can kind of take it or leave it, I think for the majority of people, they're probably going to find that to be a beneficial thing. So let's take a moment now to run you through all of the inputs on this wheel. Now, I counted 50 of them in total, but feel free to count along and let me know in the comments if I got it wrong. So we've got a thumb encoder on each side here, so that gives us 1, 2, or a pulse in either direction, a push button, 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 a push button. We've got a toggle switch here on either side, and we'll run you through and show you how these inputs actually work in the software a little later on, of course. We've got a funky switch here on either side with a nice blue anodized aluminium knob. So those are a 7-way joystick, so to speak. So we've got multi-directions. We can go left, right, up, down. We can push in, and we also have rotary encoder functionality on either side there too. So that is very useful in my experience, having one on either side. One you can assign to, say, your multifunctional display or MFD inside the game. The other you can assign to menus or, you know, things that you change on the fly quite often. We've of course got our 4 rotary encoders in the center too. Now those do appear to just be rotary encoders and not multi-position switches. You can see there's no reference to the position of the switch in each physical position there. So we'll have a look at that in the software later on too. And the addition of the rotary encoders for our thumbs is a very big plus. That's something that I think, at least for me, is extremely useful. One of the things that I miss the most on any wheel that doesn't have them, because it just allows you to make changes on the fly without kind of having to take your eyes off the wheel and kind of reorient yourself. It does make it a little bit more VR friendly too. So short of having some sort of display on the front, I can't imagine anybody wanting any more functionality than what we have here. Now we can also see on the front face here, we do have some LED backlighting, and that is completely RGB controllable as well. So within the software, you can make adjustments to the lights, configure them however you want. Now we do have some sticker sheets included too, which you would have noticed as we glanced through the contents of the package a little bit earlier in the video. So those kind of overlay over these areas here and illuminate from the back too. So what we'll do is before we go for a drive, I'll actually get the stickers populated onto the wheel. I don't normally put stickers on my wheels, but I'm gonna make an exception in this case because obviously the lighting is kind of designed to work in conjunction with those stickers. Now, one thing that I have noticed with Cube Control's wheels in the past, it's probably not going to happen during the course of the review, which is why I'm calling it out now, is over time, if we have a look at my GTX wheel here, a couple of these stickers did slip. So you can see one of them actually fell off, but a few of the others have kind of just slid out of alignment and things like that. So they do appear to be exactly the same plastic surfaces on the buttons as we've had previously, as well as exactly the same stickers. So I can only assume that we will have a similar thing with stickers moving around over time. So just something to be aware of there. But again, we'll keep you posted on that as we use the wheel, and you guys will see it in our racing videos too, if those things do start to fall off or move around. But I thought I'd just quickly call that out. And then continuing on with inputs, if we flip the wheel around here, you can see we've got our 2 shifter paddles as well as our 2 analog paddles, which we'll have a look at the configuration of later on. Now, in terms of adjustment with the paddles, there are quite a few different things that we can do here. So you can see we have slots rather than holes on all 4 of our carbon fiber paddles, and these are nice thick 5mm carbon, which we'll take a look at in just a little while and see whether we have any flex or anything like that. But you can see on the bottom here, we've got 15mm long slots here, which allows us to slide our paddles in and out by, you guessed it, 15mm. On the shifters, we have 20mm slots, so allows us to slide in and out 20mm. So that's going to accommodate for long fingers, short fingers, and everything in between. I can't imagine needing any more range than that. I don't have the biggest hands in the world, but that is very comfortable for me at its maximum threshold. And obviously, if your hands are longer or your fingers are longer, then you're going to be able to adjust from there. But I mean, you can see there, any range within that area is quite comfortable for me, so it's not going to be a problem. Now we do have a couple of other points of adjustment here as well. You can see on the top here on either side, as well as on the underside, which is going to be a little bit more tricky to see, we can loosen off those hex keys. And what that allows us to do, if I quickly loosen it off, there we go. That allows us to actually tilt the entire cage forward and back, as well as kind of push it forward like that too. So there's quite a large amount of adjustment there. Now, one thing I did notice when I was using the wheel and actually out of the box, if you don't have these screws done up tightly, the shifter does have a tendency to sort of move around as you're pulling on the trigger and work its way loose over time. So you do want to make sure that you bite those down nice and tight when you do find your ultimate driving position. I'm going to leave it about there for now to match the other side because I was quite happy with how that was sitting. Now, we don't have the same adjustments on our analog paddles here, so we don't have the ability to tilt them in and out, but what we can do is also adjust the throw on all 4 paddles. Now, if we have a look at the bottom of the analog paddle here, you can see there is actually a little slot there, and this little copper spacer that sits in between is responsible for creating the mechanical bump stop. So you can imagine if we loosen off the little spacer, you don't need to imagine because I'm actually going to do it, loosen that guy off. There you go, that effectively adjusts the throw. Now, obviously you will need to go back in and adjust your calibration if you do that, but now we've got a much larger throw on that paddle than we had up in the top position. Now, we also have a similar adjustment, although not quite as large a scope on the shifter too. So if we loosen off the 2 little screws, you can see there, that spacer is able to slide up and down, and that gives us quite a bit of adjustment in our throw of the shifter too. So you can see this side, quite a large throw, and if I grab that, that actually does allow me to kind of hold the shifter in between the shift point and fully returned, whereas on this side, very, very, very short. So I'd say probably it almost doubles In fact, yeah, it probably even maybe is a little bit more than double the throw. Now, I'm not going to give you measurements there simply because obviously the total throw is going to depend on how far out you have your shifter paddles as well. But you can see there, if I hold them side by side, we've got about double the throw on our upshift to what we do on the downshift. Now, one thing just to note here is that it is metal to metal contact there, both on the neodymium magnet side there, so you can see where that's returning, as well as on the spacer. So the shifters, you know, they're not super loud. They're not the loudest that I've heard, but they definitely could be quieter with some little rubber bump stops or something like that. But obviously then that takes away from the mechanical feeling a little bit. So it's kind of a subjective thing, but just something to point out. But you'll hear the loudness of the shifters when we go for a drive a little bit later on. But the big thing to call out here is that they are using Hall effect sensors for all 4 of these paddles. So essentially what that means is that we're measuring the amount of magnetic force between a metal plate on one side and a magnet on the other side. And when it reaches a certain threshold, it activates the shifters, or in the case of the analog paddles, as we move the magnet further away, it varies the voltage and we get an analog input that way. Now, in the past when I've reviewed Cube Control's wheels, one of the benefits that I've stated with these Hall effect sensors is that obviously you don't have any mechanical moving parts that are responsible for the measurements themselves, so you're not going to have to deal with wear and tear and things changing over time. The flip side to that in the previous reviews has been that we have seen that calibration shift, but as it stands with this, we don't expect that to be an issue, and obviously again we'll let you know if we do run into any issues there. Now, just quickly before we close off the hardware side of things, just to quickly cover a few other design elements here. We've got, again, 5mm thick carbon fiber on the faceplate here throughout, and that is genuine carbon fiber. It's not just a single layer with plastic behind or anything like that. If you get up close on it, you can see the individual layers there. I'm not going to try and count them or anything, but a nice clean carbon fiber finish. You've of course got the LED lighting that we saw before. Nice beveled edges as well. That's nice and clean. We've got the Cube Controls logo in the center here, which is machined in, so you can see the CNC has kind of grinded out the center there, so that is embossed, I suppose you could call it, with the painted finish there too. So some people will like that, some people won't like it. We've got the laser etched Cube Controls logo on the top there, and laser etched F Pro on the back too. Again, that's going to be purely subjective. I think it looks quite classy and quite cool, but you know, a lot of people don't like to spend a whole bunch of money only to advertise somebody's brand, so that's completely subjective. We've got a little bit more naming laser etched onto our shifter cages as well, so it says R-Spec ball bearing and contactless. Obviously contactless referring to the Hall effect sensors which we were discussing earlier. But overall, at least in my opinion, it's a very clean, very professional and very classy looking wheel, despite how much stuff is going on here, which is you know, quite impressive. Personally for me, I think I'd probably prefer to have black buttons throughout rather than the colors, but again, that's purely subjective. The metal housing on the back is die cast aluminium. Not sure if that's powder coated or anodized, but it has a nice kind of ripple texture to it, so it's not shiny, which I think is good because you don't want to have reflections coming off your screen and kind of bouncing all over the place. So again, like everywhere I look on this, I'm really liking what I see. I'm really not seeing much to nitpick on at all. So on to mounting now, and I've pulled a couple of other wheels off the shelf here just to give you a couple of points of comparison. So what we have on the back here is a little bracket which stands off from the main housing of the wheel itself. So it gives us this little area to work with. And what that means is that we can mount from the back or from the front, and we've got enough space there to get the little included Allen key or the little included spanner in behind and tighten things up. So if we have a look at the IRACING wheel, by comparison, you can see I've got my HRS 0 play quick release bolted directly to that. So in this case, the threads for the bolts are actually built into the housing of the wheel itself, and all 6 of those have threads. So it assumes that your quick release doesn't have any threads. Now, obviously different quick releases come in different configurations, and all I did in this case was just drill the threads out with a 5mm drill bit, and we were good to go. But what Cube Controls have done does give us a little bit more versatility in terms of mounting. So let me just quickly show you on the GTX here, which is exactly the same system. So you can see what I've done here is use 3 bolts on the threaded part of the assembly, and then left out the ones that don't have threads. So if we have a look at the wheel here, you can see 3 of the holes have threads on them, and 3 of them don't. So if you have a quick release which has a threaded mount, then you can go from the front side and screw directly through into the threads on your quick release. Or if you have one that doesn't have threads, you can go through and then screw into the threads on the front side. You can put a bolt directly through and secure it with a nut as well. So they actually do include some little bolts as well as some little nuts. in the packet too. So everything that you're going to need to mount this is there. But the thing I really like is the fact that you have configurations here for both threaded and not threaded. You can also bolt this directly to the hub on your wheelbase if you want to go without a quick release entirely. That is possible. Also, all you would need to do is just go in from the front, screw it through, and you would be good to go. So on the back here, we have a standard 70mm stud pattern as well as a 50mm stud pattern. So plenty of options there in terms of mounting. The only thing that we will just need to check is that there's no flex introduced in the wheel via this adapter, because there has been a tiny little bit of flex in some of the other Cube Controls wheels that we have tested in the past, which use a similar design to this. So we'll definitely check that out in just a minute. But last thing to talk about now is just elaborating a little bit more on the Bluetooth as well as battery. So as we talked about at the start of the video, we do have the option here of connecting via USB or via Bluetooth directly with your PC. Again, remembering that we're not using the Bluetooth protocol built into the SimiCube wireless system. So we do have the option here of complete functionality via wireless or USB. There's no limitation in terms of what you can do with the wheel, regardless of which way you're connecting. Now, because of that, we do of course have to have an internal battery here, remembering too that we do have built-in RGB lighting, which we're gonna take a look at in just a minute too. So what we have here is a 200 milliamp hour lithium polymer battery or LiPo battery, and that is good for 40 hours of use. So you plug it in and it will charge up. You'll get 40 hours of usage off the back of that with absolutely no dramas. And there is a little battery indicator LED up the top here as well to let you know if the battery is starting to get low. So that little LED will light up red when the wheel is charging, green when it's fully charged, and yellow when the battery is getting low. So what I'm going to do now is spend a bit of time figuring out exactly what stickers we want to put on the wheel. We've got an abundance of choice here and I'm not really great at making decisions, so this could be a bit of a challenge for me, but we'll get those installed on the wheel using the little included tweezers that they give you, which is nice. That's not a new thing. They have always included those in the kit. And then we'll get our quick release mounted on. I would recommend putting the stickers on before you put the quick release on, because it's a lot easier to sit the wheel flat when it doesn't have a sticky thing out the back. But we'll get that mounted on too. We'll get up and running on the rig and then take you through the software and go for a drive. Okay, so we've got our stickers installed, quick release installed, and wheel up and running on the rig. What I wanted to do first is take you through the software side of things, also explain how the Bluetooth connection works, and then we'll go through ergonomics, test things like flex, and go for a drive. So let's start off here with the Cube Controls website. This is where you're going to be downloading the software. So the wheel doesn't actually come with a USB stick or any disc or anything like that. You have to go to the website to download the software. That makes sense because obviously you want to make sure you're getting the latest version of both the software and the firmware, which you can download from here as well. So we're going to go to cubecontrols.com. We're going to hit the formula tab here and go down to F Pro. We're going to accept the pre-order warning here, reminding people that the product is going to take a little while to ship from when they order it. We're going to scroll all the way down to the table at the bottom here, click on download, and you can see here we have the option to download software and download the latest firmware version down there, which I've already installed onto the wheel, just to make sure that what I'm doing here is as close as possible to what you guys will be seeing when you get your wheels. So we click on download. All that does is just download a zip file, which we can then decompress. So you see here, we've got the firmware file, which is a zip. If we open that up, you'll see it's just a bin file, which you'll want to extract out. And then CubeSet, same deal. You just extract that and it will give you the folder. So what I've done is extract that on my desktop. So we're going to open that file up now. And we've got a folder called release. So it's not an installation package, so to speak. It's purely just a directory that unzips, and then you've got your Cube Control settings.exe here. So we're going to double click on that guy, and that is going to bring up the control software. So the way this software operates is exactly the same regardless of whether you're connected via Bluetooth or the USB cable, which I have connected now. I've got this connected just kind of down to my hub at the moment. I haven't routed it through here properly because I want to do most of my testing with Bluetooth and see if we have any issues with input lag. But let's run through the software here. We've got an input tab, an RGB tab, paddles tab, device tab, and about tab. So look, it's pretty basic software. And I do think, I'm going to start this off by saying I do think that there are quite a few pretty obvious improvements to be made with the software. I think this is is quite early, let's just say. So I'm hoping that by the time the product starts shipping, some of these improvements, which I'm going to mention here, will already have been made, but I can only review what I have here in front of me at this point in time, which is what you can also download from their website right now. So input tab, I assume, is meant to give you some sort of a visual representation when you push the different buttons on the wheel. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be functional at the moment. So this isn't really doing anything. Like I can see a picture of the wheel, but nothing else is happening here. So not sure exactly what the story is there. So on the paddles tab, we have the configuration for our analog paddles here for clutch, brake, throttle, or however you want to configure these, or however you want to map them inside your game. So we can see here we have the option to combine them or have them operate independently of each other. So we can click that on or click that off. Obviously we need to hit save setting for each change that we make here. And then we also have the adjustment here for bite point. So at the moment you can see that I've got that set to about the middle. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a percentage here. Now, that's going to make it difficult for, say, if you're trying to share a configuration with a friend or something like that, they tell you, just set it to 58%, for example. You don't have any way to actually see what 58% is exactly here. So I would like to see them add some sort of a numerical value here, maybe the option to even just punch in a number as well as operate this slider, because it's kind of just arbitrary at the moment. You can't see what's going on. But the way this works is if we have a look over on iRacing here, you can see my clutch. If I pull my left hand all the way in, you can see that goes straight to 100%. So that's operating exactly like a normal hand clutch would do. If I pull my right hand, you can see that only goes to about 50%. So the way this would work is you pull both hands in. When you want to launch the car, you release the left hand, and that takes you to the 50% value on your right hand. So you'd adjust this to be exactly where the bite point is for the car that you're driving, or exactly where the friction starts to take up and join the flywheel of the car through to the transmission. And then you would slowly release your right hand to get the car underway. So if we hold the right hand in here, you can see as we move the slider around, nothing is happening until we move the input ever so slightly, and then it jumps to the new position. So you can see if I release it and then go back, it's sitting at about maybe 15% now. If I go back to 50%, we get 50%. If we go 80%, we get 80%, and so forth. So obviously it's waiting for some sort of an input before it recalibrates itself. And then we hit save setting once we're happy with the adjustment, and we'd be good to go. This car, I think, we're going to be driving the Ferrari 488. It doesn't really need a clutch, to be honest with you, but we'll set it about there, and that should be about right for this car. So that is how the dual stage clutch works. And again, there are a couple of things I would like to see there implemented. I'd like to see real-time adjustment. I'd like to see the ability to switch hands as well. At the moment, you do have to use your left hand for 100%, your right hand for your bite point. It'd be great to be able to invert those. And then other than that, the obvious thing is the ability to save profiles and be able to just switch between them on the fly, so you can load different cars in and not have to calibrate from scratch every time. Then device tab, we've got the ability to upgrade our firmware from here. So all you need to do is just click on that guy, point it to the firmware file, which I've got in my, where did I put it? I put it on my desktop, didn't I? Yep, there it is there. So cube1v7 upgrade.bin. You just click open, and then just click upgrade, and that will flash the firmware to the wheel. Took about 2 minutes. I'm not gonna run through the process again here now, you guys get the idea. We then have an about tab here. It just tells you what firmware version you're running. So let's jump back now and have a look at the RGB tab. Now, one thing that I think is obviously missing from here is the ability to adjust brightness universally. At the moment, you have to click on each of the lights and then adjust them individually. So at the moment, there's no ability to universally change all of the colors at once or set brightness universally across the wheel. So that's something that I definitely think should be added. And again, the ability to save and switch between profiles, I think, will be a very useful feature here as well. So the way this works is simply you click on each of the LEDs. So click on it, it brings up the standard Windows UI style color palette here. You can choose from preset colors here, or just click on any color within the spectrum here. You can adjust your brightness on the right hand side here too. You can make adjustments to hue, saturation, value, RG and B here in terms of the values, 255 being maximum and 0 obviously being off. And then you also have the option here for a color code that you can enter if you know exactly the color that you're trying to replicate. Obviously remembering that the way the LED itself reproduces that color may not be exactly the same as what you see on the screen. And one thing I have noticed is that these LEDs do tend to be a little bit more blue than what is represented here. And what I mean by that is if we click on a purely white color and then hit save, you can see it's kind of like a bluish white. I'm going to change that back to red for now. We also do have the option down here to add a color to our custom color palette too. So say you found a color and brightness that you really like, you can save that to your custom colors over here and then switch between those custom colors nice and easily. So brightness adjustment is done either via the slider here from the color that you've got selected through down to black, or you can adjust via the value, of course, if you wish to do so as well. So if we want to change back to red, you can see that's changed to red. And then if we want to make that a darker red, click on red again, and then we can slide that down, hit OK, and it dims down. Now, another thing you'll notice there as well is we don't see the change replicated on the wheel in real time. So I have to actually click OK before that change is made. That's another thing I think would be really great. If possible, I don't know whether it's possible at a hardware level, but the ability to actually see what you're doing represented in real time so that you can make changes without sort of having to guess and then click OK and then go back in and change things over and over. So look, I mean, there's no major issues here. I just think there's a lot of areas that could definitely be improved. Now, one thing just to quickly note with the RGB lighting as well that I did notice is that you can't change the color of the two toggle switches. Those do stay. That's, I assume that's green. I can't tell if it's green or yellow because colorblind, but it is what it is. You guys can tell, so you can't change the color of those. Yeah, otherwise all the other colors are customizable. Now, as I mentioned before, we are connected via the USB cable at the moment. So I want to quickly explain to you exactly how to switch over to Bluetooth mode as well. Now, remember, we are using Bluetooth connectivity from your PC. So you're going to either need to have Bluetooth on your motherboard or via some sort of a USB dongle. It doesn't work through the SimiCube wireless system, which is a proprietary protocol based off Bluetooth technology. So I'm going to close this off just for now. What we're going to do is we're going to switch off the wheel. We're going to hold down button number 22, and then we're going to switch the wheel back on, and that's going to switch between modes. Now, the important thing to remember here is that it will always stay in the last selected mode. So when I switch it to Bluetooth mode, by holding that button down, switching the wheel on, we'll see the little Bluetooth indicator light up here should start flashing. Yep, there we go. So that's blinking now. Every time I switch the wheel off and back on again, it will automatically revert back to Bluetooth mode unless I go through that process again, switching the wheel off, holding down button 22, switching it back on. That will switch it back to USB mode. So I'm going to unplug that now. Remember, you can keep this plugged in via USB at the same time if you do want to be charging the battery while you're driving, but we're going to take that off just for now. And then it's as simple as opening up the Bluetooth interface on your Windows PC. So we're going to go into our control panel and open up Bluetooth and other devices. We're going to click on Add Bluetooth or Other Device. We're going to click on the Bluetooth option here. A couple of people have been confused thinking that you need to click on everything else because it mentions Xbox controllers, wireless adapters, and so forth, but we definitely want to click on Bluetooth. And then we should see in the list, we've got a whole bunch of things here in the studio. We can see Cube Control. And there we go, device is ready to go. So we click done and we should be connected. So now if we open up the Cube Control software again, everything that worked before should still work, even though we no longer have the USB cable connected. So let's just quickly test that by changing one of the lights. Bam, there we go, straight away working. So that is all nice and easy. No issues there whatsoever. And obviously we'll talk about latency and things like that when we get up and running in a moment. So let's talk a little bit more now about build quality, ergonomics, and all those important things. So the wheel's 1.1 kilograms. It does feel quite nice and hefty in the hand. I'd say it's a pretty good weight for the wheel, not overly heavy, of course, but you know, it feels purposeful and solid in the hand. It doesn't feel cheap and light. But let's pop it back on the hub quickly now and talk a little bit more about the overall feel. Now, earlier on in the video, we mentioned the change to the rotary encoders that they're using on the F Pro compared to previous generation wheels, and how the detents are quite a bit stiffer and quite a bit more purposeful than they were previously. Now, I really do love the feeling of the 4 that we have in the middle here. I think that's pretty much exactly spot on for my personal subjective preference. The thumb encoders are a little bit on the stiff side, but I'd say that's probably just compared to what I'm used to, and I think I will adapt to this quite quickly. I'd certainly say that I think the majority of people are going to prefer this over how it's felt previously, simply because it is a very purposeful move for each switch that we're doing. But we've kind of talked about that before, so we don't really need to go into a whole lot of detail on that again. All the other push buttons that we have here on the face are identical to previous Cube Controls wheels. So if you've owned one of those, the experience is going to be exactly the same. Now, again, it is a pretty subjective thing. I don't think that these are the best feeling buttons on the market. I really love the buttons on the IRACING wheels. They've got a little bit more of a tactile push to them. These, you know, are quite clicky. They, you know, they're purposeful in that there's no play in them, but it is quite a short throw, probably only 1 millimeter or less, whereas the IRACING wheels do have a bit more of a push to them. They just feel a little bit more mechanical, I guess is the best way to describe it. But there's no funny hollow feelings. They're not echoing through the wheel or anything like that. You know, they feel nice and high quality. They just don't feel quite as good as the IRACING buttons do subjectively to me. Now, the shifters, all the other paddles, as we discussed before in the video, they all feel great. The shifters themselves have a nice short throw, very intentional, and it's almost impossible to kind of hold it at a midway point so it doesn't engage. It's very much you're either clicking it or you're not. And then ergonomically, the wheel feels very, very comfortable in my hands. I really love the shape of the grip here. It's nice and simple. There's no sharp edges anywhere that are gonna rub against your thumbs if you're not using gloves. And I do like the addition of those plastic pads on the back, as we mentioned before, to alleviate any wear and tear. Now, the grip material feels really nice to me as well. You remember we mentioned before that it doesn't have that tacky kind of sticky feeling to it like some of the other wheels that we've tested with a similar design. It's got just the right amount of squish to it. Probably, I don't have a durometer, so I can't show you exactly how much squish, but probably, you know, about 1 millimeter it's pushing in when I push on it like that. So they feel really nice. They've got a maximum thickness of 45 millimeters, so they do feel quite nice and solid in your hands and very, very comfortable. There's nothing that I would change about the feeling. Where the injection mold ends as well, so where the two corners join together. A couple of the wheels that we reviewed in the past have had kind of sharp burrs in the corners where the joins are, but not the case on this wheel. And I do really love the fact that this isn't picking up all the dead skin cells and dust and debris like some of the other materials that we've seen used on Formula wheels. So thumbs up there as well. Now, I've just quickly turned off the wheelbase here as well so we can free spin the wheel with very little mechanical resistance or friction behind it. And the wheel feels nice and well balanced as well. So, you know, it doesn't feel like it's sort of trying to sink to the bottom. If I can hold it in any position, if I put it there, it doesn't feel like it's trying to rotate around. And again, some of the other wheels that we have tested over the years have been kind of weirdly balanced. So they do sort of tend to feel a little bit stronger pulling in one direction. You know, once you get past here, it kind of wants to pull down. Now, once you're up and running and the motor's energized, it's very rarely actually an issue. In fact, I wouldn't say it's ever been an issue on any wheel that I've tested, but this does have a really nice balance to it. So yeah, we already talked about the 282 millimeter diameter early on. Perfect, in my opinion, for most Formula and GT3 style cars, although some people may prefer a slightly wider diameter, maybe 300 millimeter for GT3. Again, it's going to be a subjective thing, but the you know, in terms of what the impact is, the smaller the diameter, the more twitchy the car tends to feel, the more kind of nimble. The wider you go, the more dampening it adds to the inputs, and you know, the more smooth things feel overall. So it really just depends on the type of car that you're driving. But you know, for anything that you're going to be using this style of wheel for, I'm really happy with 280 millimeters. I find the Fanatec wheels at 270 do tend to be a little bit too twitchy for me in some cars, particularly GT3 cars, but there's plenty of people that use those wheels with absolutely no issues. So that is a pretty subjective thing as well. And just one more quick thing to mention as well is these plastic surrounds that we have around the buttons. I really like the way they've laid these out. They're nice and smooth, and they make it very easy to feel exactly where your hands are on the wheel. So if you're driving in VR in particular, where you can't actually see the physical wheel in front of you, that's going to make it really nice and easy to feel exactly where you are on the wheel. And you can see here, as I move my thumbs around the wheel, I can reach all of these buttons in the top half of the wheel with my thumbs without having to rotate my hands around the wheel at all. Obviously, to reach the ones on the bottom, I am going to have to rotate my hands around, and obviously to do the rotary encoders in the center. But one of the things that I absolutely love about this wheel, and any wheel that has proper thumb encoders, is that you can just be driving, you can flick up and down mid-corner if you need to without having to take your hands off the wheel. And that's something that I think is really important, because it stops you from having to take your eyes off the road while you're driving. There's plenty of occasions where I want to change my traction control, my ABS, my fuel map and so forth while I'm actually, you know, entering a corner in a braking zone, or maybe even exiting a corner. So anything that sort of upsets my balance, upsets my concentration, forces me to adjust my grip or take my eyes off the road is going to be detrimental. And I did genuinely find that I gained time when I switched to a wheel that had thumb encoders like this over, you know, wheels that didn't, provided of course that I'm driving a car that actually, you know, requires making those changes on the fly. Now, one more thing that we always test here at Boosted Media with every single wheel is flex. So what I'm going to do here is put some stress through the wheel in various different directions and see how it responds. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of twist it towards me here, and I can feel the grips obviously squishing up. Remember, we talked before about the little bit of squish in these grips, but I'm not feeling any significant twist in the wheel anywhere there. So if I push down with my palms on the base of the wheel. If we actually take the wheel off quickly and just show you here, you can see the carbon fiber is the only thing that's supporting the bottom there. And I was a little bit concerned that we may see a little bit of flex just in those positions. But I mean, I can feel a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit there, but definitely nothing that I would say is significant at all. Even if you're sort of going around corners, pushing into the wheel like that, you really don't notice any flex there at all. Now, if I pull the wheel towards me in either direction like that as well, very, very, very little flex there whatsoever. Definitely nothing significant. There is a little bit of twist just in the back of that quick release, as we mentioned previously, might be the case and has been the case on some other wheels from Cube Controls, but yeah, definitely nothing that I would say is significant there whatsoever. Definitely nothing that is out of the ordinary. So I can't say that it's absolutely zero flex because there is a tiny bit there, but you guys can see for yourselves the amount of flex that we're dealing with. And I mean, remember again, we are running a SimuCube 2 Ultimate here. A lot of other wheelbases are likely to have more flex inherent in their design than what we're getting from the wheel itself here. So I can't imagine that this is going to be the weakest link for anybody really. And yeah, happy. So no issues with twisting, no issues with ergonomics really whatsoever. Okay, so we're in Assetto Corsa Competizione here at Laguna Seca. Let's go for a bit of a drive here. I'm going to start off without gloves, and then we'll change over to gloves to see what the experience is like with both. Another thing that I want to mention here as well is I am running in Bluetooth mode because I wanted to see whether there was any discernible lag when it came to the inputs. Happy to say so far that seems absolutely fine, no problem there whatsoever. Now, one thing to note there is it will obviously be dependent on the strength of the Bluetooth connection. So I've intentionally left my Bluetooth antenna, which is an external antenna that came with the motherboard, back where the PC is behind the screen. So it's probably a good sort of 2 meters away from where I am, but it is behind the screens and everything. So I kind of tried to, you know, put it somewhere where I thought the majority of people would be likely to have something like that. And it's absolutely fine. So I haven't had to worry about getting extensions and making sure that the Bluetooth antenna is really close or anything like that. And I was seeing a signal strength of between about sort of 70 and 80%, but obviously that's going to vary on the particular type of Bluetooth receiver that you're using, or transceiver I should say, and your PC, all the other variables as well. But no issues at all here with the shifting. Everything is working absolutely as it would be with any of my other SimuCube wireless wheels or any of my USB connected wheels too. So that is great to see. Now in terms of ergonomics, the wheel is very, very comfortable to use. I'm feeling instantly like I'm in control. It is the same diameter as the wheel that I'm used to using on the rig, so I didn't expect to feel any sort of major change there, but the grips are very, very comfortable. I love the thickness of them, 45 millimeters, I believe it was. We mentioned that earlier. And yeah, they feel really nice and solid in your hands, but the thing I like the most is they don't have that kind of tacky feel to them. And I've mentioned that a couple of times so far, but in the real world, driving with them, they feel really nice as well. Just the right amount of squish there, but they aren't picking up all that dead skin and all that rubbish, and they just aren't going to sort of look like crap over time just simply from picking up dirt and debris and skin cells and things like that. We'll see how they stand the test of time. Obviously, I will be using this wheel quite extensively over the coming months. But the shifts feel really nice as well. We do have that little bit of adjustability there in terms of the throw that we mentioned before, but a really nice intentional click there. They are quite loud with the metal-to-metal contact, but no louder than a lot of the other shifter paddles that we've tested here as well. I'll leave the, normally when I do racing videos, I edit the shift clicks out of the video just to make it a little bit more immersive for you guys, but I'll leave it in there for now as my headphone pops out of my ear. Pop that back in. There we go. But no, very, very comfortable to use. We haven't really talked about any of the other buttons yet either. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. Now in the real world, I'm not noticing any flex either. That was something that we did test earlier on, kind of under extreme circumstances, moving things around, trying to twist them and everything. But yeah, look, when I'm driving, when I'm going around corners and whatnot, I'm not feeling any flex or anything like that in the wheel at all. But let's get in and reach some of the other buttons now too. So get around turn one. Make a little adjustment to my brake bias there. Yeah, I can reach that just fine. And As I mentioned before, like I was a little bit concerned about how stiff it is, but in the real world, when I'm driving, I can feel that changing quite comfortably. And it's not causing me any issues whatsoever. We'll change the engine map 2. There we go, map 2, map 3, map 4, go back to map 1 again. And yeah, that's nice and comfortable. I can kind of do the one flick thing if I want to. So if I do a couple of clicks in close succession there, it does only change once, and that's a good thing. But yeah, if I want to make just a single incremental change there, that's nice and comfortable too. We can change our traction control level here. No problem as well. That's nice and easy to do on the fly, even mid-corner. So we'll make an engine map change mid-corner here, up to map 2. Go back to map 1. And we'll change our ABS level to 3 as well. So yeah, very intuitive, very comfortable, very easy to feel. And I guess the most important thing there is that I don't have to take my eyes off the road to make the change either, which is great. That's something that I have struggled with. And you would have seen in some of my other racing videos with the IRACING F64 USB wheel. I am sort of constantly taking my hands off the wheel to sort of make changes in the middle here. So that's all fine, very comfortable. The other buttons as well, obviously we don't really need it here, but the DRS button feels comfortable. Pit limiter on, pit limiter off. Everything's nice and easily reachable. I think I've got this switch configured to be my windscreen wiper. Yep, there we go. So that works nicely as well. Switch it back off again, on, off. And yeah, everything is really great. I'm not feeling any excessive vibration, any weird sort of hollowness, anything like that. It feels like a really nice, high quality, expensive piece of gear. And yeah, in terms of initial impressions, I think that's pretty much everything there is to cover. So I'll do a little bit more driving now in a couple of different cars, and then we'll come back and wrap it all up with our conclusions. Okay, so conclusions on the Cube Controls F Pro Formula steering wheel. So look, I think the most important thing here is that this is a significant upgrade in terms of the overall design, ergonomics, and the build quality when compared to the earlier Cube Controls wheels, which we've reviewed here at the channel. This is definitely my favorite Cube Controls wheel so far as Formula wheels go. I do really like the GTX wheel, just in terms of the functionality. Obviously you have the screen too, but people that are looking for a wheel with a screen obviously aren't going to be looking at this wheel anyway, so that doesn't really matter. But look, in terms of the ergonomics, absolutely brilliant. Really love how comfortable it is. I really love the choice of materials that they've used throughout here as well, particularly these new rubber grips. They've got just the right amount of squish in them. At 45mm diameter, they're really comfortable too. And they do have a nice smooth finish too. They don't tend to feel kind of clammy and gunky in your hands like some of the other wheels that we've tested. So again, that is going to be a subjective thing, but I personally really like it. And if we, just moving around the wheel, we can see little things that they've done, like including little plastic parts here rather than the rubberized parts, just to reduce wear and tear and increase the longevity of the wheel. Now, obviously we can't comment on longevity just yet. We will continue to use this wheel over the coming months at the very least, and see how we get along with it. And we will of course let you know if we do run into any major problems. But yeah, I really, looking at the wheel, it's obvious that they've taken on a lot of the feedback from customers from previous different wheels and implemented a lot of those things into this new design. So that is something that I think should definitely be celebrated. Now, in terms of other standout features here, I really love the new rotary encoders that they've used. Obviously it's great great that they have the thumb encoders in convenient positions, which are nice and easy to reach without having to take your eyes off the road or, you know, take your hands off the wheel. So that did make it easy to make adjustments on the fly, even if you were mid-corner, which is something that I think is very valuable to sim racing. But just in general, the detents feel really nice and clean, very easy to tell exactly where you are, whether you've made a change or not, and you're not going to be bumping any of these encoders and making a change by accident without realizing. RGB lighting throughout as well, which again is a pretty subjective thing. Personally, I think it looks quite classy, and I do like the ability to sort of, you know, adjust brightness and colors throughout. But there were a couple of things in terms of the software that I thought could be improved. The ability to create and save profiles and then switch between them quickly, as well as the ability to brighten or dim all the LEDs on the wheel all at once, were the two main things that I thought were missing from the software at this point in time. But I don't see any reason why they couldn't be added into the future. I'm really happy to see the magnetic connection as well. That definitely is a big improvement over previous generations, although I did nitpick in the review the fact that I don't really like the idea of having exposed pins on the side which is connected to your PC, simply because if something does get in there and short out those pins, it could cause permanent damage to your USB hub or your motherboard or both. So I would prefer to see recessed pins on the connector side and then the pogo pins on the wheel side. That's the way I would design it if I was doing it, but I don't really see that being a major issue. As we showed in the review, if you do drop something on it, it does tend to kind of go to the side rather than sticking in the middle anyway. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for anybody, but just something that I would change in the design if it were up to me. But definitely didn't have any issues with that disconnecting while we were driving or anything like that. Very strong magnetic connection. And they've obviously put quite a bit of time and effort into making sure that that is going to suit sim racers' needs. So that is a good thing too. Now, just while we are talking about connections, one of the things that I was concerned about with this wheel is that we may have a subpar experience when we're connected via Bluetooth. Again, remembering that this does connect directly to your PC via Bluetooth rather than via a SimuCube wireless system or anything like that. So it isn't using any sort of proprietary protocol. It requires a Bluetooth connection actually physically present on your PC. Now, I kind of had this set up exactly the same way as I would imagine most people would, which was the Bluetooth antenna sitting on the PC, which was kind of behind my screens and probably about 2 meters away from the wheel. And we had absolutely no connectivity issues whatsoever. There was no noticeable lag or latency or anything like that. And I'm sure, you know, if you were to get out and measure it, you probably would see a difference. But, you know, in the context of actually driving and experiencing the wheel, it was nothing that I noticed at all. But of course, your mileage may vary there. If you have an antenna further away or a less powerful system in terms of the Bluetooth signal strength, then you may run into some latency or disconnection issues. But for us personally here in the studio, we didn't have any issues with that whatsoever. And the fact that that isn't dependent on any particular manufacturer's sim racing hardware is going to be a big selling feature, I think, for this wheel, because it means you can genuinely have a wireless wheel on, you know, any wheelbase that you choose to use this with. So whether it's something like a, you know, a VRS Direct Force Pro, which doesn't have its own ecosystem when it comes to interfacing with a wheel at this point in time, that is going to give you wireless connectivity there. You could use it with a Fanatec base, provided that you have a compatible adapter, of course, to enable force feedback. But yeah, really you have unlimited options here in terms of what you can use this wheel with, which I think is a really great selling point and something that's going to appeal to a lot of people. But look, otherwise, really, in terms of the hardware, I really love the wheel. I do feel like the software side of things has quite a way to go yet. I'd go as far as say I was disappointed with the software, simply because there are so many obvious things that could be improved. Maybe some of those things will be updated upon by the time you guys get your hands on this wheel. It is still a month and a half away, at least at the point in making this video, from when you guys will be getting your hands on pre-orders. So the main things that were missing from the software were just a couple of things which seemed to be not quite finished. When you pushed on the buttons on the input screen, you couldn't actually see those buttons highlighting. Things like not having a percentage reading for the bite point clutch, not being able to save presets there and reload them, not being able to create profiles to switch between different cars. These are all things which can be implemented relatively easily from the software side, but you know, we can only review what we have in front of us here. And I do think that there were some glaringly obvious things that were missing or unfinished in the software as it stands as of right now. So definitely some improvements to be made there, and you know, we'll be keeping an eye on that as we use the wheel and seeing how that progresses. But in terms of upgrading firmware and all those things, very simple to use, and the software is quite clean. It's, you know, well presented. It's just a little bit lacking in terms of features at this point in time. But at 860 euros, obviously it is an expensive wheel, but I think that the build quality is on par with what I would expect for a wheel of that price point compared to other wheels that are on the market. There's definitely nothing here which stands stands out as lacking in terms of build quality. And I do think that if you spend that kind of money on the wheel, you are going to be happy with it. I don't think you're going to be disappointed with what you receive. And yeah, I think it's really as simple as that, guys. So hopefully you found today's review interesting and useful. If you have, as always, please do leave a thumbs up. We've put a link for you guys down in the description below to our product and review library, where you can check out reviews of all the other wheels which we've compared to in today's video. And there's also some affiliate links there too. So if you want to help support the channel at no additional cost to you guys, that is a great way of doing so. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you very much, guys, for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.